So hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Future of Work webcast here on ChangeNerd. Thanks so much for being here today. I'm your humble master of ceremonies, Anil Saxena, and today we have a really special guest, a good friend of mine, Richa Gupta. She has spent the last 20 years working in HR and most recently served in senior level positions as a VP at GE Digital and most recently at PayPal. And now she's taking a little bit of time to curate her second act and spend some good time with her kids and her family, which is totally awesome. And we are going to have what I think is going to be a really fun conversation about talent practices in a world of constant change. So, Richa, thanks so much for being here today. Really appreciate you spending a little bit of time with us.
Well, thank you, Anu, for inviting me to your podcast. I'm truly honored, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. So Richa and I talked a few weeks ago. We were having this really interesting conversation about the state of organizations. And so the first thing that I wanted to ask you, Richa, was how do you think about talent practices now as we're kind of, in your words, standing on a stage of Jello and pouring more Jello on top of it? So first of all, help me with the analogy because I love it. And then how are we building those talent practices for the future?
Absolutely. So let's talk about the stage of Jello first. I'm not saying 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, the change wasn't there. I think change has existed for as long as we have existed, right? But I think more recently, there has been the intensity, the frequency, and the magnitude of change is just insane. And all companies are facing it, all economies and societies are facing it, right? So when you translate that for what it means for the corporate world, we are constantly either competing in the market. There are new regulatory and compliance matters that are unseen and unheard of. There's so much innovation going on. There are, the companies are constantly trying to stay ahead in the curve for, grabbing great talent and retaining them in the companies and making sure the workforce is as productive as it can be while we are constantly battling with all sorts of pressures around us, like in lives and socio-political and climate and environmental and things like that. So I think the environment is like a pressure cooker right now. It's highly competitive, highly intense. And doing HR and building sustainable talent practices in such an environment can be very, very daunting, right? So, when I think about the magnitude of this kind of change, the analogy that comes to my mind, the mental picture it creates for me is Jello, right? So we are standing on a stage of Jello and we are constantly pouring more Jello on it before the Jello underneath is settled down. We are constantly acquiring new companies. We're constantly venturing out in the new markets with our products. We're constantly introducing new products, right? So it feels like we're standing on this platform of Jello that is so wiggly, and we are trying to all anchor ourselves into it, our practices, our operations, our businesses, etc. So that's where kind of the analogy of Jello came into being. To answer your second question, how do we think about talent practices when we are all standing on that stage of Jello, where the change is constant and intense? I think first thing first, Anil, for us HR practitioners, thinking about HR as a product organization. I think it's truly important and critical. And let me say more about what I mean when I say HR as a product organization. You've got to constantly understand who we are serving. Gone are the days when HR would cook the playbooks in the background and just throw it on the wall with the hope that the talent practices will stick, right? We now have a workforce leadership team and all of our constituents who are busy managing all of this change, and the expectations on them are huge. And their attention span, the mental bandwidth for them to take on what HR produces is rather limited. So I think, being a good product organization from HR perspective, the first thing first is understanding the customers, the segment that we are serving and partnering with, and then being very diligent about the amount and the frequency of the HR products that we introduce to our clients, right? So we as HR practitioners, I think we have to build more muscle around how we manage the roadmap of our products more diligently to meet the needs of our customers, but not to overwhelm them. Meet where they are as we're leading path into the future. The second thing is connecting talent frameworks with the context around us. So, in this context of high change, for example, you're introducing a workshop or some training around how to build resilient workforce. You don't just go roll it out, right? You connect it to the context that you are in, connect it with a big change that you and your leaders are driving through, and then introduce that practice and the concept of resiliency and how you're enabling leaders and employees to manage more resiliently in that change intensive environment. So constantly connecting your products with the real life challenges that your customers are facing. I think the other big thing I found that is helpful and critical for talent practices is the tools and technologies that come in support of the rollout of those programs. I often meet employees and coach them who come to me and say, I've had five managers in the last 2 years. Right. With that, think about the continuity of any development conversations, the coaching conversations, the progression of the employees that the previous managers had been thinking about, but now they're gone out of the system or have moved on to other jobs internally, and what it does to the continuity of the development path for those employees, right? So the tools and technology that can capture the kind of the records on how the employees are progressing, what is to be done, what is the next phase in their development, etc. If we have those records, that continuity can be preserved. So I think that is fairly important for us to complement our talent practices with the tools where all of this can be housed. The next thing, Anil, for me, I think the concept of employee communities, especially in this era of constant change, is very, very important. It's less about one-on-one HR interactions. It is more about bringing the communities together to solve for something. And, a lot of times HR doesn't have to have all the answers, but, the best thing we can do to serve our constituents is to pull people together, pull managers together, pull employees together around common cause, where they can connect and you can introduce some base principles and practices, but then create platforms where they can all come together and share with each other, what are the opportunities that they are facing? What are the challenges? How are they managing it? If manager one is facing something, there are high chances that the 10 other managers in the room have similar experiences and challenges. So how do you create community-based HR practices where people are coming together to help take the concepts forward? I think that's a non-negotiable in this time. The last thing that comes to mind is having nimble leadership and the talent base across the organization. When we hire, I think the competencies and the skills and the personalities that are more resilient, that are more agile, that have the attitude of, as Satya Nadella says, learn it all versus know it all. Right? How we check and test for those skills in our interview process. So as we're bringing new folks in, they, almost already have that DNA to be nimble and to kind of go through the change and lead through themselves through the change and others around them with more finesse.
Yeah. Wow. So first of all, that's awesome. And let's unpack a little bit of that, because I feel like that's so rich in our thought process about the shift in how we're really leaning in on people. So first of all, that notion of really making sure that HR is thinking of themselves as a product organization. So what do you think, just sort of based on your experience and your learning, what needs to shift in HR kind of fundamentally for practitioners to kind of think that way a little bit differently?
Yeah, I think in HR, Anil, we pride ourselves in being the masters of leading change and change management. But oftentimes, I've seen is that it's hard to manage change, right? And even with the new employee and talent practices that we introduce, creating an HR product is, I think, just half of the battle. How you roll it out, when you roll it out, how you pilot your products and kind of at a smaller level before you scale it globally to enterprises is fairly important. And in the last couple of ecosystems that I've experienced, that has been the challenge. And you have something amazing that you've built, but then how are you? And you have built 10 of those things and products, and you're just throwing it out to the employees without connecting those together, without making sure that when the 10 things land on the managers or employees, that they're able to connect, product one to product two to product three, and really are able to see how the help is to be absorbed, right? So just introducing the products and the talent frameworks is not enough. It is helping the managers and employees come up with that overall narrative on how different talent practices are connected together, what feeds into what, right? What is an input, what is an output, and how are they supposed to use all of those in the day-to-day operations. So I think that's where HR across the board, I think, needs to build more muscle.
Yeah, wow, that's really great. That whole notion of kind of connecting the work with the business of the business and how does this enhance what we're doing, and that really kind of points to that notion of contextualizing things. So, right, you're not going to roll out 9 things in December and then expect people to do performance evaluations and all those other things. I think that's really brilliant. And as we're kind of leveraging technology in a much smarter way, you said something about being nimble and resilient. And so, what does that look like in the organization? How is that different in terms of leadership than now?
Absolutely. And I have an example, and it's something that I've experienced in the last 2 companies that I've worked, is both companies had desires to do away with the performance evaluation rating system. So, and they were drifting more towards more ongoing performance and coaching conversations and feedback versus managers sitting with employees once a year and telling them what went well, what went wrong, etc. And in order to achieve that, you can't just take what you have and the structure that you have and throw it out of the window without introducing and worrying about the culture, right? I mean, there are certain prerequisites to claiming that I'm gonna not have the rating system in my performance evaluation anymore. You can do that, but you've got to have a very strong culture of performance and feedback. And it's easier said than done, right? You can say, yeah, we can sit down and give each other feedback all day long. But it takes practice, it takes skill, it's an art. There needs to be a culture of almost fearlessness and that safety that Richa is providing feedback to Anil. Anil is not going to be upset, or it's not going to come back to bite me in a certain way, right? So, you've got to create that openness into the culture and safety that it's okay to let each other know how we are experiencing each other, right? So it takes a lot of practice and a lot of building the culture to get to that point. And then once you have that, once the managers are able to provide feedback, once everybody's feeling safe and secure and comfortable with that concept, then you can go and innovate more around your performance evaluation processes and systems and ratings and throw out the curves and everything else. So when I say the agility in the system, that's what I meant, right? So you've got, your culture has to be agile and nimble enough to take the leap into the next era. And then in terms of the leadership across the board, has to be nimble enough to start to demonstrate the future, right? The future practices, and almost all of it starts at the top, right? So if your leaders aren't behaving in the way where you're preaching others that they've got to adopt a whole new way of providing feedback, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because when we think about introducing change or leveraging new HRIS or some kind of feedback tool or app or Slack or any of those kinds of things, right? That's the easy part, right? That kind of implementing the technology feels like sometimes it's the easy part. It's the change and the transition that sort of goes along with it. And I love what you're saying about this notion of feedback. I know in organizations I've worked in most recently, right, that whole push to no ratings and things like that, but people aren't talking to each other. And so how do you intentionally create a culture of feedback in an organization where it's not safe to give feedback? And so as you're thinking about organizations in the future and their need to be more nimble, what can we start to do now to get people change ready, to kind of be ready to be a little bit more nimble?
I think it is as much of an art as it is a science. The agility, the resilience can be taught as a skill. And then there is a cultural component to all of this, right? So if you're asking people to be transformative, with transformation comes risk. And if the people have to be sure and comfortable to know that if I am transforming and there is risk, there are high chances that I'm going to make mistakes. And when I make mistakes, how am I treated? So I think the whole circle of saying that you want to transform to how you're treating people who have gone through that journey, and almost raising people who take risk and make mistakes as good examples to say, here's a person I want to I want us to take care of, and that person exemplifies the risk taking that comes inherently with transforming something. I think that's the whole chain that I've seen, because many times it's just so easy to say, go ahead, take risk, innovate, but then on the other side, the repercussions aren't necessarily positive for people, right? So I think culturally, that's the cultural element. You can train people to be resilient and transform and gain the skills to manage change, etc. But what happens afterwards? What does it mean to their employment, the promotion, the success, the rewards? I think you've got to tie both in order to send a signal to a system that it's okay to transform. It's okay to take risk. It's okay to make mistakes. And once you fall, then we got your back.
Yeah. Wow, that's really interesting too, because you mentioned that idea of systems, and I think that's such an important thing for us as we're kind of contemplating the future of work, that we really have to elevate our thinking that it's not just isolated things happening in a vacuum, right? This is sort of interactive, interwoven, right? And so that notion of really thinking about what the system is really powerful. So I want to shift gears just for a moment, because in that last conversation that we had, we were talking a little bit about, right, so in this world where we're kind of standing on a stage of Jello, there are things that we can do to kind of help to anchor folks. And you were bringing up a concept that I think some folks that are watching might be aware of, called durable teams. And so I guess I'm just curious from your perspective. So first of all, what is a durable team? And then how can we intentionally bring that into organizations?
Yeah, it's a concept that PayPal adopted, but there are many other firms I know who use similar constructs. They might call them squads or pods. PayPal calls them durable teams. So it goes two ways. First of all, for companies who have a multitude of products, right? Large product sets. And PayPal is a very complex company, right? So it has, two-sided network, and the company serves the consumers and merchants and, everybody in between. And PayPal has been in existence for about a couple of decades now, and has been very acquisitive all along, right? So we're constantly, the company has developed products organically, and it has also acquired companies and IP and talent to continue to build on its talent stack as well as the product stack. The concept is kind of twofold. Number one is how the company organized its work, which was called, mission-based portfolios. So of all the products the company had, it created some portfolios, and those portfolios were constructed based on some common set of customer needs. And those were only, so many portfolios in the company, right? So many products to fewer portfolios of like work. Then on top of the portfolios, then the company created durable teams. So it is, the portfolios are how the work is organized, and then durable teams or mission-based teams is how the teams are organized. So PayPal, for example, has been farther along in its agile journey. And one of the principles in agile transformation is that you have your three in the box: your engineer, your technologist, your product manager, and your designer. Then, that went on for a few years. It was going well, but we all know that it takes more than just those three personas to build a product and take it out to the market, right? So then the concept went from 3 in the box to N in the box, where, there are more cross-functional teams beyond just your technologist, your product manager, and your designer, who need to come in to those teams and collaborate cross-functionally to build a product and to get it out of the door. So those durable teams working on those portfolios, they come together, those cross-functional teams, for a durable period of time to work on something that is very mission-based, that is very customer-centric. The concepts of portfolios as well as durable teams does a few things to an organization. I think at PayPal, we saw good success in, when we organized work in a way where there was no confusion on who was working on what, and deliberately shared those portfolios across. So there was no confusion on the roadmaps that a particular durable teams were working against, right? So there was a lot of clarity on the work that was being done. It helped reduce some of the duplication of effort, because then there weren't 10 teams working on one feature functionality. It was very clear that this piece of feature and functionality is being worked in this portfolio by this durable team. So a reduction in duplication, clarity of mission, because the work was very customer centric. So no longer EDI, which is executive driven innovation. We went from EDI to CDI, which is customer driven innovation. These durable teams were very much anchored into the customer discovery work, really understanding what the customer's needs were, then translating those into the product specifications that the technologists then built upon. And then also testing those out in those durable teams with your go-to-market colleagues to make sure that from conception to taking the product to the market, the cross-functional team was coming together in an organized way for a durable period of time to work on something that was really customer-centric. Those durable teams or mission-based teams are also fully empowered, right? So there is usually a workday manager for a person that works on durable teams, but then there is also a durable teams working and management structure. So there's a special chief product officer and a chief technology officer, proxy roles, right, within each durable team, fully empowered to groom their own roadmaps, to make decisions on what feature and functionalities to be built when, not every time they had to run to the executive sponsors to get their permission when something changed. The team felt fully empowered to make those decisions themselves. And only a few things were escalated up to the management chain where, when the team couldn't make certain decisions. And then what this concept did at PayPal, and it's still improving, is promoting collaboration, right? So how the work was organized and then how the teams were organized, there was no confusion. It was a community of people cross-functionally came together to do something that was of significance and meaning and has a lot of clarity around the mission that it was going to go serve. So, those teams, became the families almost, right, of cross-functional professionals coming together beyond their organizational silos to produce something that was meaningful. So I think it's a concept that we're, the company, PayPal, is still practicing and getting better at. But it is something that many other firms can learn from.
Yeah, that's so interesting because that notion of really aligning resources to focus on a customer need or that is customer driven seems really smart. And it seems like something that organizations could sort of naturally migrate to instead of these sort of arbitrary, product organization and right, that kind of thing, because it feels like those organizations are not, they're serving the customer, but not really directly, right? They're sort of building things in isolation and right, launching them on the world and hoping that the customers are going to like them. So as organizations are really moving towards a much more agile mindset, right, and really everything that they're doing, what's the benefit to an employee, to an individual contributor, to be part of a durable team? Why is that something that might be good for them?
Absolutely. I think number one, we all work for a lot of things. Think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Starts with the safety and security, goes all the way to achieving your maximum potential. I think all of us work for all of those things, right? But I think the most important in all of this is the meaning of what we do. Working on significant, clear, meaningful missions, right? That's at the core of what's most exciting for most employees. I think durable teams, given the clarity of the mission that these teams have, given how anchored their work is to what the customer is looking for and expecting from a company, the distance between who is building the product and who's going to use the product, it's almost shrunk in that structure because you don't have 10, 20 executives in the middle telling you what to do, and they might have their own opinions and agenda about what should be done, what's more important, what should be prioritized, etc. So you are eliminating all of that noise from the system, and you're pulling. So the meaningful work is number one, something that you can have a direct line of sight to between what you do and what the customer is looking for. And then the community where people come together to learn from each other, where there are no organizational boundaries that often get in the way of our productivity and efficiency and happiness at work, right? The organizational dynamic, if you will, if I had to choose the right words. So these teams, those structures reduce some of the dynamic. It doesn't completely take those away, but it reduces the dynamic where people can actually come and work and not have to worry about the constant shift or the ambiguity around their work, etc. And these teams also buffer the employees from some of the other changes that are going on around them constantly. The organizational structures are changing. This leader left, that leader came in. Well, all of that matters. But when you know what you're working on, what is the mission at hand, you almost focus on that versus everything else that is going on around you. So I think it provides that clarity, that connection with the customer, the meaningful work, a buffer from the organizational dynamic, and it reduces the intensity of the change that is going on around you, so you can focus on the work that you were brought in an organization to do.
Wow. Yeah. And that notion of being, so it feels like, and as we were talking about, sort of that anchor that sort of gives you that a little bit more certainty in the, when you're on the stage of Jello. And it really makes me think about, we hear a lot about this idea of people in organizations, millennials, Gen Zs, right? They really are looking for impact, for meaning, for connecting the work that they're doing to something bigger than themselves, and being able to kind of to go around all of the normal workings of an organization so that you can work on things that directly impact a customer. That seems really, really powerful. And the other thing that you point to that I think is really interesting is this idea of creating community. So I mean, I hear all the time now about how people are feeling more distant and more lonely and all those kinds of things. And it feels like doing something like this helps to alleviate some of those feelings, and also gives you just a natural kind of club
Connection.
to be a part of.
Mhm.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And buffering against change, boy, that's really powerful. That's being what is that, a port in the storm where everything is kind of roaring around you, but you know what your job is. Um, so that is really an interesting concept, and one that I know that we're hearing a lot more about, but I'm hoping is going to become a lot more prevalent in organizations.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know that we have limited time, so I don't want to take too much more of your time. I do want to say there is one other conversation, maybe not right now, but one other conversation that I'd love to have with you at some point. I know you and I met at GE Digital, and we had that conversation about what is it that existing organizations need to do to transform, right? So if you're a company like GE, what is it that you need to be doing? How is it that you need to be thinking? But I think that might be a conversation for another day.
Absolutely. I would love to tee it up here, and
Yeah,
then we
please.
can follow up. I think, transformation nowadays is coming in all shapes, sizes, and forms, right? There are smaller pivots, then there are big transformations. Um, there are, in my view, certain critical prerequisites and conditions for success, um, irrespective of any kind or size of transformation a company is looking for. There are a few things that I want to call out, and then I would love to follow up with
Yeah.
you in another podcast. Number one is the strong purpose and mission of a company, and how linked and anchored the transformation is to that purpose. Super important. That is the first prerequisite. The second is, I would say, the character and the strength of the leadership team, starting from the top of a company, because you have to be at the front leading that transformation, and also showing and demonstrating the values and character and strength that it would take of that leadership team to inspire everybody else to join the movement. Super important. Without a shared strong purpose and mission and a leadership team who's so connected, I won't say 100% agreeing to everything, because there's always agreement and opinions, but a team that is aligned on the values to drive certain transformation, and then also brings the different diverse perspective to lead that transformation forward. And I think the last thing is, I'm in HR, I'm biased. A super strong HR and talent team that is kind, fair, objective, and strategic. And I would say the last thing, but the most important, is boundaryless. Often in HR, I hear, I'm in talent acquisition, I'm in HR, I'm an HR business partner, I lead benefits. You know what? When too much of our own org design starts to show in our product, it's a bad thing, right? Our clients don't care if I lead recruiting or I lead comp and ben or I'm the HR business partner. To them, we are all the same. And that's, one of the most critical advice I have for my clients when they talk about taking products to the market. And I say, in your products, is your org design showing in your products? If it is, it's a bad thing. Our customers don't have to know how we are organized, how we produce. They all need to care about what we produce and how it matters to them. And Anil, I would say something that Madeleine Albright said, all right, there's a special place in hell for women who don't care for other women. I say in that hell, there's a special cell for HR people who aren't there for their peer HR people to help them with, lead all kinds of transformations as a team. And HR has such a critical role to play, but we have got to be a team, not different functions within HR.
Yeah, it's so brilliant too, because I feel like, so first of all, it's not new, right? We've been going through transformations and transitions for a long time, like you said at the very beginning of our conversation. And that notion of really making sure that we kind of understand fundamentally what it is that we need to be doing and what the gap is. So where are we now and where do we want to be? That you have leaders that are sort of walking the talk and being examples of the change. And that notion of having an HR organization that's really integrated into that transformation, because like we've been talking about, right? You can introduce technologies and new products all the time. That it's not to say that that's easy, but in order to enable an organization to really shift, you have to bring the people along in order to do that. And having an HR organization that's really embedded in that practice, that's so important. And I love the idea, right? HR, there's a special place in hell for HR people that don't support other HR people. And, I think that notion of boundaryless is so important, because no matter, so it's sort of like when I call into a service company that I have an issue with, and they start telling me about how that's not their problem. I don't care, right? I want them to resolve my problem. And I feel like we in HR have a similar journey to take, that we really are, we're servicing the organization. And it doesn't matter what role we're playing, we're all servicing the organization. And when one of us fails, all of us fails. When one of us succeeds, all of us succeed.
You're absolutely right. So let's talk about it the next time.
Yeah, absolutely, Richa. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. What a rich conversation, and so much fun. And yeah, we'll just have to follow up. I'd love to have another one of these conversations to focus on that. All right, you guys. Well, thank you so much for participating today. Thanks, Richa, for giving us her knowledge. So I'm Anil Saxena, your Master of Ceremonies for the Future of Work webcast here on ChangeNerd. Don't forget, if you want to get more tools and are interested in learning more about this subject, you can learn about it through getting on to ChangeNerd Premium. If you want to contact me and talk about any of the issues that we've brought up so far, or you have a suggestion for a topic in an upcoming webcast, you can reach me on LinkedIn, here on ChangeNerd, or at www.cube214.com. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Anu.
Thank you. All right.